Welcome back. I hope that wasn't too challenging, but I think it's a great exercise. So let's go over the solution. Remember, we're at this point with our recipe component and we want to build this. So I suggest starting first with the nav bar, mainly because it's all static HTML, so it should be an easy place to start. So first thing I want to do is I'll just create a copy of this. So we have the starter code and the solution. So I've gotten that directory copied over and I've started the server. So we're all set up to start development in the new recipe prop solution folder. Now let's talk about that navbar. I'll start by making the two files for the component, the navbar.js and the navbar.css. Now let's fill in the navbar component. Like always, we need the standard imports and the class definition, so let's do that. Okay, now we've got the skeleton of our navbar component. The next thing that I'm going to do is just return our HTML here. And I've already got that set up. Whoops. So this is going to be our HTML for the navbar. We have the recipe app, which will be off to the left, and then the nav off to the right, which has new recipe, home, about, and contact us. And all these things won't do anything for right now. So that's our navbar component. Let's add it into our recipe app. All right, now we've added it to the recipe app. Let's see it in the browser. There we go, it's rendering. Now let's add some CSS. All right, let's talk over this CSS quickly. So in the top level of that component, I made a header tag. So I'm just adding some styles to that header. The main thing here is that it's display flex. We're adding some space between and adding some color for the text. We're taking off the list style for all the LIs in the header, and we're taking off the text decoration for our anchors. We're adding some opacity when we hover. Some pretty standard stuff. So I'll include this in the notes, but I won't go over it line by line. In this last part here, we're changing the nav slightly when the size of the window changes. All right, let's see that. And as you can see, now we've got a header that looks a lot more like our solution. So pretty good progress. Let's now work on a list of these recipe components. Now I'll make a recipe list, JS and CSS, so I'll add that. And the purpose of this component is just to take in a list of recipes and then display them using the recipe component. So it's not going to do too much, we'll see. I'll start by adding the normal boilerplate that we're always going to have. We're going to import React and component, and we're going to create the class. Now this recipe list is going to render a list of recipe components, so let's import that as well. And we'll also want to import the CSS that we just created. So now I've got everything set up. The next step would be to accept a prop that describes all the recipes that I want to display. And since we don't have any data coming in from the user, let's create some default props here so we can display something. So at the top of my class, I'll add some default props. And I've already got an array of default props that I'll copy over. So these are the props that I use for my solution. We've got spaghetti, milkshake, and avocado toast for my solutions. And remember, so far we've only got spaghetti as an image. I'll copy over the milkshake and the avocado toast as well. So all three of these files should exist in the public folder. Next, let's specify some prop types. So I'll add my prop types here. And the only prop I'm taking in for this component is an array of recipes. And like I said, that's going to be an array. And this is an array of objects this time. Now with prop types, you can get more specific and say prop types.shape and describe the shape of every object that you expect. But in this case, we're going to describe that inside of the recipe component, so no need to do it twice. Also, you'll notice that this is underlined because I don't have prop types imported yet, so I have to go up to the top and do that. Now in my render method, I just want to iterate over the recipes array. I want to map over each element and return some JSX. So let's do that. Now all I have to do in this component is return the list of JSX elements inside of a div. I've added a class name here so we can style this container. Now we need to use this component inside of our recipe app. Let's go to recipe app.js. And rather than render one recipe here, let's render the whole recipe list. So first I'll import the list. And then I'll render the list. And remember, since we have default props here, I'm not passing in a recipes array, but in practice, we should pass that in when we have real data. Now let's check that out in the browser. Oh, it looks like we've got a bug here. And it says it can't resolve recipe list.css, and that looks like it's in the recipe list.js file, so let's check that out. And the issue here is that I didn't do a relative path. So I need to add relative to this current directory. And now it works. All right, so we've got all of our recipe lists. I just need to do a few things. So I'll add some styling to the recipe list so that it doesn't show up in a column like this. And then I'll also add those two images. First, the styling. So recipe list.css. I'm going to add the recipe list has display flex direction row, and then this flex wrap so that it'll wrap to the next line. And then when the screen gets small, it'll change the display. Let's see that. Great, now they look much better. Now off camera, I'll just add in those other images by dragging and dropping into this public folder, my avocado image and my milkshake image, and then check it out. And I added those images, so let's go check out the website. And there we go, looks good. Looks just like our solution. Great. So the last step I want to do before I call it quits is to add prop types to that recipe component. I'm just going to paste in the prop types and explain. So just like the other example, we're just adding prop types to this component so that the user of the component is clear what things are required. So in this case, we've got prop types for the title, the ingredients, the instructions, and the image. And come to think of it, we should probably also make this recipe list required. So anyway, all of these are required because they're needed for display. And in the recipe list, I'm also going to add required to this. And that's all. That's our completed app. So next up, we'll talk about one more props concept, props.children.